Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering DEI is killing jobs. Biden's DEI rules are worse than Hamas. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from PJ Media. How toxic is DEI? These companies are turning down billions in free money to avoid it. From the Daily Mail, Biden's DEI rules are worse than Hamas. Top microchip makers are postponing U.S. expansion and instead expanding in dangerous Israel and Russia because American grants come with so many equity caveats. From the Wall Street Journal, Intel delays $20 billion Ohio project, citing slow chip market. Construction on 2 factories now slated to be finished in late 2026 as company also waits for government incentives. The incentives are money. Also from the Wall Street Journal, one of Biden's favorite chip projects is facing new delays. Taiwan Semiconductor pushes back timeline for second plant at $40 billion Arizona site. And a third company, U.S. government sluggish CHIPS Act payouts slam the brakes on Samsung's fab. Company delays mass production at Texas fab to await further CHIPS funding. What's a fab? A fab is a semiconductor manufacturing fabrication plant. From the Daily Mail, companies including Samsung and Intel are backing out of using the U.S. as a hub to build semiconductor microchip makers. An opinion piece in The Hill points the finger at the diversity, equity, and inclusion necessary in government subsidies as the main reason for the exodus. The subsidies are paid for by the CHIPS and Science Act, a $280 billion bill to fund semiconductor chip manufacturing and boost competitiveness with China. We also need semiconductor manufacturing because we need it for national security. We use semiconductors for everything. We need those chips for phones, for national security, for appliances, literally for everything. But to some people, pushing diversity, equity, and inclusion is more important, so that's what they're focused on. In the Wall Street Journal, you see this. From the Wall Street Journal, the incredible expanding CHIPS Act. More companies can get semiconductor subsidies if they adopt DEI and other progressive social policy. The Biden administration decided they would share these funds with other companies that followed their progressive agenda. So it's going beyond chip making, it's going to the vendors of chip makers, which includes producers of chemicals, silicon, custom tools, and more, a much larger cross-section of the economy. So they're spreading the money everywhere to push their progressive policies. Is this actually going to get these semiconductors made? No, it's not. It's not going to get the semiconductors made. But it will capture the money and allow them to use that to push their DEI agenda. Top microchip makers are postponing their expansion into the U.S. and setting up shop in Israel and Russia due to equity caveats that are required for them to receive grants from the U.S. government. And it's not like they're not willing to allow some of these equity requirements, some of the DEI stuff. It's just some of it is just actually not possible to do. And the same demands are not placed on them in other countries that they develop these manufacturing plants in. So, of course, they're not going to do it here. The Biden administration promised earlier this year they would be handing out $39 billion in grants to encourage semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S. I talk about financial grants on this channel from time to time. I like to say it's free money. It's not actually free money. It's free money with strings attached to use the money in certain ways. So they can have $39 billion to give out, but if all the requirements of using the money makes it too difficult to use that money in a productive way, it's not going to get used. Shortly after the announcement, however, Intel announced they would be holding off their Columbus factory, while Samsung also delayed their facility in Texas. Despite billions in subsidies, 2 experts believe the tech company's decision to back out of building manufacturing facilities in the U.S. stems from the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy attached to the funds. In an opinion piece for The Hill, CEO of Strive Asset Management, Matt Cole, and head of research at the company, Nicholson, say the subsidies are so loaded with DEI that it can't move. The pair say that Intel has now built manufacturing plants in Poland and Israel, meaning they would rather deal with the threat of Hamas rockets and Russian aggression than the U.S. government's DEI regime, while Samsung is pivoting towards making South Korea the home of its semiconductor manufacturing plant. The Taiwan Semiconductor manufacturing company has also pushed back production of a second facility in Arizona. The subsidies are paid for by the CHIPS and Science Act, a $280 billion bill to fund domestic semiconductor chip manufacturing and boost competitiveness with China. The package includes $52 billion in funding for U.S. companies to produce computer chips as well as a 25% tax credit for companies who invest in the market. It includes $39 billion for chip manufacturing companies to expand and modernize their technologies. The act also authorizes $11 billion to be given to the Commerce Department for research and development, and another $81 billion for the National Science Foundation. In their piece, Cole and Nicholson said that part of the CHIPS money calls for the creation of chief diversity officers and helping minority groups. It also calls on chip makers to increase the participation of economically disadvantaged individuals in the semiconductor workforce. The two added, in short, the world's best chip makers are tired of being pawns in the CHIPS Act political games. They've quietly given up on America. Intel must know the coming grants are election year stunts, mere statements of intent that will not be followed up. Even after due diligence and final agreements, the funds will only be released in drips and drabs as recipients prove they're jumping through the appropriate hoops. They also added that chip makers have to make sure they're hiring female construction workers at the firms. In a 2023 report from the Department of Labor, they said that 10.8% of construction workers in the U.S. are women. Despite the small numbers, companies must ensure they have childcare for the workers and engineers who, according to the two, don't exist yet. They add, this is the stuff declining empires are made of. As America pursues national security by building a diverse workforce, China does it by building warships. Instead of solving the problem, the people in charge are trying to cover the problem up just long enough to win re-election. Don't be fooled by the Biden administration's upcoming Weekend at Bernie's Act. The CHIPS Act is dead. Here's what they're telling companies they have to do to get the CHIPS Act funds. From the Wall Street Journal, the incredible expanding CHIPS Act. More companies can get semiconductor subsidies if they adopt DEI and other progressive social policy. Bureaucrats excel at pushing their policy agendas through gaps in the law, and the Commerce Department is showing how it's done. The agency is expanding a subsidy to dictate social policy, pushing progressive causes on companies in many more industries. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said she's broadening a program that was previously limited to computer chip manufacturers. Her agency is charged with handing out $39 billion in aid to chip companies under the CHIPS and Science Act that Congress passed last summer. But as usual in Washington, legislators left final details in the hands of Biden administrators. In February 2023, Ms. Raimondo announced the aid would come with strings attached. Any firm seeking a chip grant of more than $150 million must submit an employee child care plan in tandem with community stakeholders, which means unions and progressive groups. Grant recipients of all sizes must also adopt the Biden administration's Good Jobs principles, which include a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion as the government defines it. None of this is specified in the CHIPS Act. They just added extra rules on top of the money, a couple of $100 billion, and now they take it and use it to push their agenda. Yet now, Commerce is expanding the program along with strings. Grants originally meant for chip makers will also be made available for suppliers, Ms. Raimondo says. That includes producers of chemicals, silicon, custom tools, and more, a much larger cross-section of the economy. The aid will be hard to decline for companies eager to keep a competitive edge, but they'll have to join their chip maker customers in submitting to administrative social diktats to get the cash. Naturally, Ms. Raimondo claims this is strictly business. We can have as many fabs as we want, but the reality is, we also need the supply chain, the chemicals, the materials, the tools, she told the press last week. But it's also political business. Commerce is leveraging the subsidies to coerce companies to impose societal policies it couldn't pass through Congress. The more companies it traps with its subsidies, the broader its political reach in allocating capital. The CHIPS Act subsidy pool is finite, which means that the more companies that can tap it, less cash will be available for the chip makers. Ms. Raimondo said in May that the program was already vastly oversubscribed, with more than 200 grant requests, and that not everybody who wants money will be able to receive it. Don't be surprised when the companies start lobbying Congress for another round of subsidies to compensate. Meanwhile, this U.S. version of French industrial policy has produced an arms race of subsidies around the world. All of the top international players in chip production, including China, South Korea, and the European Union, have increased their subsidies since Congress passed the CHIPS Act. Lawmakers boast about domestic deals like Micron Technology's proposed plant in upstate New York. They're less likely to mention the same company's plan to build advanced chips in Japan with a grant from Tokyo, or its new plant in India. Once the subsidy train gets going, everyone gets on board and it's hard to stop. The U.S. is moving fast along the track of state-run capitalism. Republicans who voted for the CHIPS Act have handed more power to the Biden administration to run more of American business. But as DEI has been getting more divisive, companies are ditching their teams and firing their DEI employees. This is from the Washington Post. Zoom and Snap are among companies that have cut roles in recent weeks. DEI jobs peaked in early 2023 before falling 5% that year and shrinking by 8% so far in 2024, according to data shared with the Washington Post. The attrition rate for DEI roles has been about double that of non-DEI jobs. In recent weeks, Zoom has axed its internal DEI team amid broader layoffs, and Snap cut workers who worked on retention and engagement efforts for employees from underrepresented groups. Meta, Tesla, DoorDash, Lyft, Home Depot, Wayfair, and Twitter were among major corporations making steep cuts in 2023, slashing the size of their DEI teams by 50% or more. Corporate America's retreat from DEI has coincided with increased legal risk and political animosity towards systemic efforts to boost racial equity. State legislators have introduced at least 65 anti-DEI bills since 2023, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education. The resignation of Claudine Gay, Harvard University's first black president, amid plagiarism allegations in January, was billed as the beginning of the end for DEI in America's institutions by the conservative activists who led the campaign to oust her. Mentions of DEI on corporate earnings calls have plunged in the past year, according to the Wall Street Journal. For companies that were never really committed, this is the perfect air cover for backing off diversity, said Joelle Emerson, CEO of DEI consultancy Paradigm. Not all companies downsizing teams or giving up on the work, Emerson said, noting that some employees overhire when they establish their DEI teams. Quote, I don't know that it ever made sense to have a 25-person diversity team sitting to the side of a core business function. Companies should be able to say, we've tried this, it didn't have an impact, we're going to try something different. Well, you would think the consultants would actually know how to staff a department if the department has any measurable, accountable factors to it, judging whether or not it was important or relevant or something they should have in the first place. The recalibration is happening under serious legal pressure. Last year, when the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in college admissions, the decision didn't apply directly to employers, but the ruling kicked off an effort driven largely by conservative activists to dismantle race-conscious policies in other domains of American life. But not yet in the federal government. In the federal government, they can still come in, hijack the program, force it to have DEI, make it impossible for these companies even to accept billions of dollars in grant money because the federal government is so ridiculous and unrealistic. Even accepting the money for free, it's not worth it for these companies. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.